Welcome, dear listener, to a gentle journey into the deep history of Final Fantasy VII. Tonight, let us drift across time, into eras long before the events you may know, to explore the ancient roots of this beloved world. Settle yourself comfortably, for what follows is a story of people who listened to the earth itself, who nurtured its spirit, and whose lives shaped the fate of all that came after. Thousands of years before the age of reactors, corporations, and conflict, the planet was guided by a remarkable people, the Cetra, remembered in whispers as the Ancients. Unlike ordinary humans of their age, the Cetra carried a rare gift. They could hear what they called the voice of the planet. It was not merely a sound, but a constant dialogue woven into the rhythm of their lives. The Cetra were nomads by nature, moving with purpose across plains and forests, healing the earth as they travelled. Imagine them beneath wide, starry skies, following unseen guidance, their steps aligning with the pulse of the world itself. To them, the planet was not land to be conquered, but a living companion. They did not simply hear it, they spoke with it through the current of spirit energy, the great river later known as the life stream. Their connection gave them abilities that others saw as miracles. They could breathe life into barren fields, coaxing green from the dust. They could find pure water hidden deep beneath rock, and they could soothe the wounds of the land itself. Most sacred of all was their gift of spirit walking, a state of meditation in which their consciousness merged with the planet's, allowing them to hear its wisdom directly. Though always moving, the Cetra built wondrous places along their paths. None was more beautiful than the Forgotten Capital, hidden in the northern reaches of the world. There, stone and crystal intertwined with magic, buildings shaped not by tools but grown in harmony with nature. At its heart stood the Crystal Prayer Room, a chamber where the most gifted among them gathered to combine their voices, to speak as one with the consciousness of the planet. But the Cetra were not the only people of that time. Others had chosen to abandon the wandering life, settling in permanent villages and cities. These were called the spirit folk by the ancients. The Cetra did not condemn them. Instead, they often visited, sharing healing techniques, helping crops grow, though they kept their deepest mysteries in trust only among themselves. Their understanding of life and death was profound. To the Cetra, death was not an end, but a return, each soul flowing back into the planet, carrying memories and experiences with it, enriching the great cycle. To them, existence was an eternal circle, life, return, and rebirth. Their purpose, as they saw it, was to protect this cycle, to ensure the planet grew stronger with each passing generation. Daily life among them reflected this devotion. At dawn, they would gather in circles to sing, songs attuned to the planet's hidden frequencies. Children were taught from the earliest age to quiet their thoughts and listen for the softest of whispers within the wind and soil. They wrote no books. Their wisdom flowed instead through oral traditions, songs and stories, rich with symbolism and sacred truths. The Cetra also possessed knowledge of the natural world that feels impossible to us now. They could sense storms days before they formed, read the turning of seasons in the tilt of stars, and feel disturbances deep in the earth long before disasters came. This intuition made them natural guardians. They did not claim this role as power, but accepted it with humility, protectors not of themselves, but of the balance that sustained all life. Of course, theirs was not a life without hardship. They faced harsh winters, natural disasters, and occasional hostility from those who feared their ways. Yet they remained steadfastly peaceful, choosing to heal instead of harm, to understand instead of condemn. Even in conflict, their instinct was not to dominate, but to restore. For countless generations, this harmony endured. The Cetra's bond with the planet remained strong, their wisdom flowing seamlessly from elders to children. Yet history turns, and even the strongest traditions can be shaken. Around 2,000 years before the story we know, a night came that forever altered their fate. The Cetra felt it first as a deep disturbance in the flow of spirit energy, a wound in the voice they knew so well. They looked skyward and saw a light streak across the heavens, trailing darkness like burning ash. What fell to earth that night would be remembered as the calamity from the skies, the being we now call Genova. The impact was catastrophic. On the northern continent, the planet shuddered violently as the object tore into its surface, creating a crater so deep it would never truly heal. The shock waves of the strike rippled across the world, and the Cetra felt the pain of the planet as though it were their own body. Debris filled the skies, dimming sunlight for years, changing weather patterns, and bringing long winters. When the dust settled, something climbed forth from the crater. Genova did not appear as a monster, but as something familiar and alluring, a woman with long silver hair, who seemed gentle, almost divine. She walked among the Cetra, offering knowledge and power, speaking in tones that invited trust. Some among the ancients grew wary, sensing unease in the planet's voice. Yet others, curious or hopeful, welcomed her. It would be their undoing, for Genova's gifts were not blessings, but infection. Those who drew close to her began to change. At first it seemed subtle, heightened strength, sharpened senses, but soon they transformed into monstrous reflections of her own form. The tragedy was unbearable. The infected did not simply vanish into strangers. They retained their memories, their voices, their faces, families, embraced loved ones only to be consumed by the corruption, spreading it further. Worse still, the infected lost their bond with the planet, replaced by the alien whispers of Genova. The Cetra could feel every loss, every soul torn from the cycle, as a wound within the life stream itself. Their greatest gift, their deep connection, became their heaviest burden. They understood at last that this was no ally, but a destroyer, seeking not to live with the planet, but to corrupt it from within. The battle with Genova had begun. Night fell softly over the world the Cetra had tended for generations, and for a brief moment everything seemed as it had always been. Songs at dawn, quiet listening at dusk, the pulse of the planet threading through every living thing. Then the harmony faltered. A tremor ran through the life stream itself. A shiver, the ancients felt like pain in their own chests. Eyes turned skyward. A brilliant light tore across the heavens, trailing darkness, like burning ash, heaven's dark harbinger. It struck the northern continent with a force that shook the land to its bones, hollowing a wound so deep that it would never truly mend. The northern crater. The sky dimmed under drifting debris, seasons shifted, and strange weather lingered for years. The Cetra listened and heard the planet cry out. When the dust settled, something emerged from the crater. It did not look like a monster. It wore a familiar shape, a woman with long silver hair and a presence that felt almost sacred. She spoke of sharing knowledge, of power and peace, and walked calmly among the settlements. Some of the Cetra grew wary. The planet's voice stuttered whenever she drew near. Others, guided by curiosity or kindness, received her as a teacher. That was how the calamity truly began. Her gifts were not blessings but infection, changes that first appeared as advantages, sharper senses, greater strength, uncanny awareness. Soon those gifts twisted flesh and mind alike, reshaping people into reflections of the visitor's own alien form. The cruelty of this corruption lay in its intimacy. The infected did not instantly forget their lives. They remembered faces, places, lullabies. Loved ones recognized familiar voices at the door and ran to embrace them, only to spread the blight further. Worse still, the afflicted lost their bond with the planet. In place of the life stream's guidance came the visitor's whisper, cold and persuasive. The Cetra could feel every break, every voice that fell silent in the great chorus, as if a thread had snapped inside the earth itself. Their deepest gift, hearing the planet, became a burden they could not set down. In time, the Cetra learned more of the enemy that called itself Genova. It possessed what their records would name the gift of the memetic, the ability to read memories and take on forms pulled from the minds it touched. It could approach as a friend, a parent, a long-lost companion, wearing trust like a mask. Knowing this did not erase the danger, but it sharpened the ancients' resolve. They changed their ways. No one met a stranger alone. Voices were tested against sacred phrases. Gatherings took place inside sanctified rings of spirit energy where deception faltered. Even so, Genova adapted, and the struggle deepened. The war did not blaze like a single battle. It spread slowly and relentlessly, village to village, season to season. The Cetra were healers before they were fighters. They reached first for restoration, not destruction. They learned to purify ground Genova had touched, pressing hands to soil and stone to draw out the corruption. These rituals took incredible strength. Small safe zones appeared, circles of clean spirit energy where the infection could not cross, but each one cost lives. The ancients also wove barriers of living light, invisible walls tied to the life stream's flow that could halt the advance of the plague. Maintaining those boundaries required constant prayer, shared breath, and the combined focus of many, another sacrifice accepted without complaint. There were victories, families rescued from the edge of change, springs cleared of the alien taint, children whose ears opened again to the planet's voice. And there were losses that bent the strongest backs. Entire caravans vanished, cities emptying at dusk did not answer at dawn. The Cetra refused to meet cruelty with cruelty. Even when they had to strike, they did so to protect the life stream, not to punish. They carried their fallen to consecrated ground and sang the return, recognizing each death as passage back into the current that sustains all life. As their knowledge grew, so did their methods. The most gifted among them, spirit walkers who could step fully into communion, found ways to isolate Genova's influence, cutting the threads it spun through minds and memories. These ceremonies were perilous. Those who led them often did not rise again. They poured themselves out entirely, like water drawn to soothe a fire. Yet with every act of courage, the balance shifted a little. The zones of safety widened. The barriers held longer. The planet's voice, though still pained, steadied in places it had trembled. Years passed in that steady, exhausting rhythm. The Cetra recorded no grand timeline, only songs and remembered names. They fought not for victory, as conquest, but for restoration. To set the cycle right, to keep the world's memory clean. At last, the moment came when all their strength, all their understanding, and all their losses converged. Drawing on the life stream, through a chorus of their finest, the surviving ancients managed to press Genova into dormancy. They could not unmake what had fallen from the sky, but they could bind it. Deep within the northern crater, they raised a containment grown rather than built, a vessel of living crystal, its structure braided with the same harmonies their cities once sang into stone. The chamber responded to the life stream's flow, dimming and brightening in careful cycles, designed to suppress the alien presence within. Around it, they placed sentries and set wards, whose patterns only the Cetra fully understood. The prison was not a monument to triumph. It was a promise to the planet that, for a time, the wound would not be allowed to spread. Even sealed, the danger remained. The Cetra knew that as long as Genova existed, the Earth could not fully heal. They kept watch, passing down the discipline of listening, teaching children to hear not just the planet's music, but its silences, the places where whispers might hide. They mapped the currents of spirit energy, tracing how they eddied around the crater, noting each disturbance with the care of gardeners tending frostbitten roots. Their records spoke plainly. This was not the end, only a reprieve bought with countless lives. In the wake of the sealing, the world felt different. The air tasted cleaner in some places, yet fragile in others, as if a single careless breath might crack it. The ancients returned to their travels, healing and teaching, trying to stitch together what the visitor had torn. Some settled near the far north, keeping ritual vigil. Others carried the story outward, reminding every settlement, Cetra and spirit folk alike, that balance must be guarded, not taken for granted. The songs at dawn changed slightly. New verses named the threat and honoured those who had given themselves to protect the flow of life. For all their effort, the Cetra also understood humility. They had witnessed something the world had not faced before, an intelligence from beyond, skilled at wearing trust and unravelling memory. They would not assume the planet stood strong simply because the cage glowed quietly in the dark, and so they listened more carefully than ever. In the patterns of rain, in the shifting light of the stars, in the soft rise and fall of roots beneath their feet, their purpose remained what it had always been, to keep the cycle whole. This chapter of their history closes not with a parade or a proclamation, but with watchfulness. Lanterns burning in the snow, guardians singing low to the crystal that held the sleeping danger, and caravans moving south to teach what had been learned at terrible cost. The planet, wounded yet enduring, gathered its strength around the scar. The ancients breathed with it, part of its recovery, patient as seasons. And somewhere beneath stone and silence, the earth began to consider its own answer to such a threat, a response not born of anger, but of protection. But that is a tale for another night. Though Genova was forced into dormancy and locked within its crystalline prison, the wound left in the planet ran deep. The Cetra's sacrifices had granted reprieve, but the earth itself remained uneasy, as though listening for a threat it knew would one day return. In that silence, the planet began to prepare, not with songs or rituals, but with creation. From the very currents of the life stream, the planet shaped enormous guardians. They were not armies, nor were they meant for conquest. They were extensions of the world's own will, born to awaken only when the balance was threatened beyond what mortals could contain. To the Cetra, who first sensed their presence, they were awe-inspiring, vast as mountains, radiant with purpose. These beings came to be known simply as the weapons. Each one was forged with intent, a different aspect of the planet's defense embodied in colossal form. Their existence revealed something profound. The planet did not rely only on those who listened to its whispers. It had chosen to craft protectors of its own, living fortresses that carried fragments of its consciousness. The first of these was Sapphire Weapon, guardian of the seas. Imagine a form so immense that ships appeared as driftwood beside it. Its body gleamed with crystalline armour of deep blue, mirroring the ocean's shifting surface. Though vast, it moved with grace, cutting through currents as lightly as a dolphin. Yet within its elegance was great power. It could harness the crushing pressure of the ocean's depths, concentrating it into beams of destructive energy. Its purpose was clear: to defend the waters and all the life-stream currents hidden beneath the seas. Upon the land strode Diamond Weapon, towering even above the mountains themselves. Its crystalline body shimmered in sunlight, scattering rainbows into the sky wherever it walked. Despite its staggering size, it was not slow. Each stride covered leagues, a sentinel able to reach any threatened land. Along its arms were long-range energy conduits, weapons that could strike at threats from afar, erasing danger before it ever neared the soil it guarded. To those who saw it, Diamond Weapon appeared as both a wonder and a warning, the earth itself rising to defend what lay beneath. Yet no single form could serve every purpose, and so the planet created Ultimate Weapon, the most adaptable of its children. Its armour was deep violet, streaked with living energy that pulsed like flowing veins. Unlike its siblings, Ultimate Weapon could shift its approach, changing attack patterns to suit whatever danger arose. Within its chest burned a core that gathered the lifestream directly, able to unleash devastating power in moments of greatest peril. Records describe it not simply as a guardian, but as the planet's final judgment, called upon when all other defences failed. Beneath the burning deserts, another slumbered. Ruby weapon, guardian of the earth itself, was designed to move unseen, tunneling through sand and stone as easily as fish glide through water. Its armour was crimson, layered like the strata of rock, and from its body jutted immense claws capable of tearing through even the hardest materials. Unlike sapphire or diamond, Ruby was built to protect not the surface, but the planet's deeper layers, the hidden reservoirs of the life stream where energy gathered most richly. In its silent vigil beneath the shifting sands, it represented the will of the world to shield its heart. Still deeper, in the hidden Mako springs where the life stream welled upward, the planet placed its final guardian, Emerald weapon. Draped in luminous green crystal, Emerald was the most pressure-resistant of all, dwelling in the abysses where light itself could barely reach. Its role was vital, to protect the fountains of spirit energy that rose directly from the core, preventing any corruption from poisoning the flow. Beyond brute force, it could generate shimmering protective fields, domes of energy that shielded the sacred waters from harm. To the Cetra, Emerald was less a creature than a living shrine, a guardian of what was most precious. What made the weapons extraordinary was not their scale alone, but their nature. They were not simply beasts born of stone and energy. They carried fragments of the planet's own mind. They were able to sense one another, communicating across vast distances in silent harmony, coordinating their purpose as though they were one body made of many forms. The Cetra recognized this design. The weapons acted as an immune system, each cell distinct, but all serving the health of the whole. Their crystalline armor, radiant and imposing, was not only protection, but conduit. Through it flowed torrents of planetary energy, amplified and focused into strikes no human technology could rival. And though their presence inspired awe, they were not invincible in the way myths often portray. They could be harmed, even slowed, but as long as they remained bound to the life stream, they could regenerate endlessly, rising again and again until their duty was fulfilled. Yet perhaps the most mysterious aspect of these guardians was the mercy of their slumber. Despite the Cetra's war against Genova, despite the countless losses endured, the weapons never awoke. The ancients succeeded in sealing the calamity before the planet deemed it necessary to release its most terrible defences. Once Genova's prison held firm, the weapons were guided into hibernation. The planet hid them across the world, each in a place suited to its nature. Sapphire beneath the endless seas, diamond buried deep in the land's embrace, ruby beneath the deserts, emerald in the oceanic depths, an ultimate weapon resting unseen until it might be called. There they would sleep, immense forms half merged with stone and tide, indistinguishable from the world they were part of, until the planet's voice summoned them again. For the Cetra, who had fought and bled against Genova, this was both comfort and sorrow. Comfort, because they knew the planet had armed itself with guardians that would outlast them. Sorrow, because they also understood what it meant, that the world would one day face threats even greater than those they had endured. The weapons were a promise for the future, but also a warning. Genova was not the only danger that might come, so the ancients continued their vigil. They tended to the land, told their children of the sleeping giants, and carried songs that reminded them the guardians were real, not legend. They knew the planet would one day need them, though whether it would be centuries or millennia, no one could say. Thus this chapter closes with an image, both peaceful and uneasy. Colossal figures slumber in the deep, sapphire cradled by currents, diamond cloaked in cloudlight, ruby beneath shifting dunes, emerald sunk in abyssal darkness, and ultimate hidden in silence. They are the earth's answer to calamity, dreamlike in their stillness, yet terrible in their potential. For now, the planet rested, its wounds slowly knitting, its voice softer in the ears of the Cetra. But beneath oceans, deserts, and mountains, its guardians slept, waiting for the moment when harmony faltered again. As centuries passed after the ancient struggle with Genova, the balance of the world shifted. The Cetra dwindled, their songs fading into myth, while new generations of humanity chose permanence over wandering. They built towns, then cities, and over time their curiosity grew into ambition. In this changing age, a small weapons manufacturer would rise to power unlike any seen before. This company bore the name Shinra. At first, Shinra was unremarkable, one among many suppliers of arms for regional disputes. The founder, father to the man who would later become President Shinra, possessed a sharp instinct for opportunity. He guided the company carefully, investing in promising technologies, securing contracts others overlooked. In those early decades, Shinra produced efficient engines and compact weapon systems, useful both for war and for civilian applications. It was practical, unglamorous work, but it laid the foundation for what was to come. The true transformation began with research deep in Shinra's science division. While studying fragments of ancient records unearthed in archaeological digs, a young scientist noted repeated references to a mysterious current, what the Cetra had called the planet's voice, what the texts described as spirit energy. He proposed a startling theory, that this energy, invisible and immeasurable by conventional tools, could be harvested, stored, and converted into usable power. Experiments followed. Devices were built to draw the luminous flow from the Earth itself. At first, the results were faint, fragile, almost failures, but persistence turned whispers into a roar. What emerged from those trials was the concept of Mako energy, the lifeblood of the planet made into fuel. The first prototype reactor rose in the mountains near what would later become Midgar. Barely larger than a conventional power plant, it was simple, even crude by later standards. Yet the results were undeniable. A single small facility produced energy far exceeding coal or oil, and without smoke or soot. Lights burned brighter, machines ran longer, and the promise of a new age unfolded. President Shinra recognized opportunity with ruthless clarity. He understood that this discovery could change not only industry, but the structure of society itself, and so began Shinra's careful campaign of expansion. Rather than march forth in conquest, the company first offered solutions. Cities struggling with energy shortages were approached with contracts. Mako, they said, is clean, efficient, and plentiful. We will build you a reactor, provide jobs, and guarantee prosperity. Communities signed eagerly, drawn by the promise of light and growth. And with every contract, Shinra's hold deepened. For once a reactor rose, dependence followed. Entire towns came to rely on the steady hum of the energy drawn from beneath their feet. The process was called urban development, a phrase polished for the public. In practice, it was a subtler conquest, economic threads woven until local governments bowed to Shinra's will. To manage its swelling influence, Shinra reshaped itself into distinct departments, each with its own territory of power. Urban development oversaw the planning and construction of new cities around reactors. The science division pressed ever further into experiments with Mako. Public safety maintenance, in truth a private army, enforced order. The weapons development division ensured military supremacy. Even a space exploration program was born, a gesture toward progress that doubled as propaganda. Every department reported upward, all answering to the president at the tower's top. Beneath him, rivalries brewed, scientists against generals, engineers against administrators, but the system held. The lure of power kept them aligned. The true symbol of Shinra's might came with the decision to construct a city unlike any before. Midgar. Envision a colossal plate of steel, circular and suspended high above the ground, supported by 8 vast pillars. Upon this plate would sprawl a city divided into sectors, each powered by its own reactor. To those above, Midgar was a marvel. Lights glowed unceasingly, machines never faltered, homes were warmed, and businesses thrived. It was proof, Shinra declared, of humanity's triumph, an age lifted above nature's limitations. But the city's brilliance cast shadows. Beneath the plates lay the slums, where discarded people and remnants of older settlements clustered in perpetual twilight. There sunlight never reached, scrap-built homes, and survival was pieced together day by day. Rising at Midgar's heart was Shinra Tower itself, 70 stories of glass and steel piercing the smog. Within its walls were the headquarters of every major department: science, public safety, administration, all gathered beneath the president's command. The upper floors gleamed above the haze, a literal separation between rulers and the world their ambition scarred. To maintain its image, Shinra invested heavily in culture as well as power. The company sponsored entertainment, arts, research, and even public news networks. Celebrations were broadcast of each new reactor opening. Achievements were praised while consequences were carefully hidden. To many citizens across the world, Shinra was not a corporation but a savior, guiding humanity into prosperity. Only those close to the Earth's pain, or those who remembered the old tales of the Cetra, questioned the cost. And the cost was real, for each reactor did more than power homes and factories. It drained the life stream itself, drawing out the essence that once healed and sustained the planet. In bright cities, people did not hear the weakening whispers beneath their feet, but the Cetra would have recognized it instantly. The cycle disrupted, bleeding strength. Still, Shinra's expansion accelerated. Towns became cities. Cities became hubs of commerce and governance, all tied to Shinra's grid. The company no longer answered to nations. Nations answered to Shinra. The language of contracts masks the reality of control, but the result was the same. Power shifted not to governments or communities, but to a single tower, where decisions were made by those who saw the world not as a home, but as a resource. The rise of Shinra was not merely industrial, it was philosophical, a declaration that humanity's future lay in domination, not harmony. Where the Cetra once walked in dialogue with the planet, Shinra saw only fuel. Where once the Earth's voice had been sacred, now it was silenced beneath the hum of machinery. And yet, in Midgar's lights, it was easy to forget. The city glittered, wealth flowed, entertainment dazzled. For many, life had never been easier. Few asked what price the planet paid. This was the world into which new generations were born. A world of reactors and skyscrapers, of slums and privilege, of ambition towering above the earth while the planet whispered in pain below. The harmony of the ancients had long faded into legend. In its place stood Midgar, shining, vast and hollow. Even as Shinra's reactors expanded across the world, the company was not satisfied with controlling cities alone. Its ambitions reached further, to the battlefield, to human potential itself. Power, once measured in contracts and energy output, was soon sought in flesh and bone. It was in this hunger that the program known as Soldier was born. Soldier began as a collaboration between Shinra's military department and its science division. Scientists had long observed that exposure to Mako altered the body. Too much could kill, but carefully measured doses hinted at extraordinary results. Faster reflexes, sharper perception, heightened endurance. Shinra asked a daring question. What if those changes could be harnessed deliberately? What if ordinary soldiers could be transformed into living weapons, stronger than any rival army could hope to field? The answer was the Soldier Enhancement Process. Subjects were taken into specialized facilities where they underwent controlled exposure to condensed Mako energy. The procedure was taxing in every sense: physical, mental, even spiritual. Many candidates simply could not survive. Those who endured emerged changed. Their bodies carried new strength, their movements quickened beyond normal limits. Most distinctive of all were their eyes, glowing with an otherworldly blue-green light, the mark of Mako's touch. The program was organized into 3 tiers. Third-class soldiers formed the foundation. These were recruits who had survived initial treatments and basic training. They performed security duties, assisted in missions, and filled Shinra's ranks with enhanced but still modest capabilities. For many, simply reaching third class was considered an achievement, proof of resilience in the face of an unforgiving process. Above them stood second-class soldiers, warriors who had adapted more deeply to Mako exposure. They carried greater strength, sharper reflexes, and more advanced combat skills. Second-class operatives often served as leaders in the field, mentoring new recruits and taking on missions of greater risk. Their enhancements were visible not just in their glowing eyes, but in their bearing, stronger, faster, more confident, marked by the strange serenity of those who could hear and feel more than ordinary people. At the pinnacle stood first-class soldiers. Few ever reached this level. To do so required not only rare physical compatibility with the treatments, but extraordinary mental fortitude. First-class soldiers were legends in their own time, capable of feats that seemed impossible, fending off entire battalions, leaping with ease across impossible distances, wielding weapons heavier than most could lift. At any given time, there were scarcely more than a dozen such individuals active in the world, each one feared and admired in equal measure. The selection process for soldier was rigorous. Potential candidates were screened not only for strength but for subtle genetic markers, details that might hint at compatibility with Mako infusion. Even among the chosen, many faltered. Hallucinations were common during the treatments, visions that some described as fragments of the life stream itself, memories not their own, impressions from across time. Officially, Shinra dismissed such accounts as delusion. Yet the stories persisted, whispered between recruits, feeding both fascination and fear. Training followed the enhancements. Soldier operatives learned to control their new capabilities, to wield weapons far too heavy for any normal soldier, to move with agility that bordered on the unnatural. They were drilled in specialized combat forms, designed to harness their amplified senses, able to strike before an opponent even realized danger was near. Beyond strength and speed, they were taught endurance, how to channel Mako's energy into sustaining themselves, even when wounds should have ended them. But the power came with a cost. Enhanced perception could overwhelm. Many reported hearing too much, the hum of machinery miles away, the whispered conversations of strangers, the subtle shifts in air pressure before storms. What should have been a gift sometimes became unbearable. Soldiers withdrew into silence, or struggled to keep their balance in a world suddenly louder and brighter than the human mind was meant to endure. To help them manage, Shinra provided quarters within its headquarters, specifically designed for their altered senses. Walls were built to dampen sound. Lights could be dimmed or softened. Recreational areas were adjusted for those whose bodies never quite returned to rest. On the surface, it appeared a gesture of care. In truth, it was containment, keeping the enhanced warriors always within Shinra's grasp. Weapons became both tool and symbol. Each soldier received a blade suited to their fighting style, massive in size and weight, yet wielded with precision by those strong enough to carry them. Among these arms, one became legendary, the Buster Sword. A weapon too heavy for most to lift, it was not only steel, but emblem. A mark of honor passed from mentor to student, each bearer adding their own story to its legacy. To see the Buster Sword in battle was to witness not just a weapon, but the pride of the soldier program made manifest. Shinra carefully managed the image of soldier. Through its propaganda network, these warriors were presented as heroes, shining examples of progress. They were paraded before the public, their glowing eyes described as proof of their nobility rather than the sign of irreversible change. Posters celebrated their strength. Broadcasts praised their sacrifices. Children dreamed of joining their ranks, never knowing the cost behind the legend. In reality, every success was built upon countless failures. For each soldier who stood proudly in uniform, many more lay broken by the process, bodies unable to withstand the strain of Mako infusion. Those who did survive often faced long-term instability, minds fraying beneath the weight of their altered senses. Yet these truths remained hidden, sealed behind Shinra's walls, while the myth of soldier shone bright in the world above. Within the company, soldier was more than a fighting force. It was a symbol of Shinra's philosophy, that power could be engineered, perfected, and owned. It stood as proof that humanity no longer needed to bend to the natural limits of the body or the voice of the planet. Through science and control, Shinra had made its own champions, living weapons bound not to the life stream, but to the corporation itself. For the planet, the cost was invisible to most. Each infusion, each spark of Mako drawn from the depths to fuel these transformations, was another thread pulled from the great current beneath the earth. But in Midgar's towers, such concerns were ignored. Shinra saw only results: stronger soldiers, victories assured, dominance maintained. Thus the soldier program came to embody both awe and dread. Awe in the eyes of citizens who saw protectors shining with power beyond imagination. Dread in the whispered fears of those who understood that humanity was being reshaped, cut loose from the harmony the ancients had once guarded. And at the heart of it all, the Buster Sword gleamed, passed from one generation of warriors to the next, each bearer a chapter in a story not yet complete. It was more than steel, it was legacy, honor, and weight, a weapon heavy not only with iron, but with memory. The rise of soldier marked a turning point. No longer was Shinra only the master of cities and reactors. Now it commanded legends, men and women shaped into myths by Mako's glow. And the world watched, awed and unknowing, as humanity stepped further away from the planet's voice, and deeper into the echo of power. While Shinra's public face glimmered with the triumph of reactors and the might of soldier, a different kind of ambition grew in the shadows of its laboratories. The company's science division had always sought deeper secrets, answers buried not just in the earth, but in the very origins of life. In those pursuits they uncovered a presence that would alter history once again, the preserved remains of what they first believed to be an ancient. It was Professor Gast, one of Shinra's most gifted scientists, who led the expedition that brought this discovery back from the northern crater. The specimen seemed remarkable, humanoid, with features that hinted at great antiquity. To Gast, it was a key to understanding the lost civilization of the Cetra. He studied the remains with care, documenting structures and anomalies that seemed to blend both human and alien traits. At the time, he did not yet know the full truth, that this was not a relic of the ancients, but the very calamity they had fought to seal away. Shinra, however, saw only opportunity. The remains were placed under lock and guard within Shinra Manor, a sprawling, isolated estate in the quiet mountain town of Nibelheim. Beneath its floors, the company built a state-of-the-art laboratory, outfitted for cellular analysis and experimentation. It was there that the Genova project began. Gast was not alone in his work. Alongside him laboured Lucretia Crescent, a brilliant researcher fascinated by genetics and cellular integration. With her was her colleague Grimoire Valentine, whose curiosity matched her own. The three pursued the mysteries of the specimen, debating whether it represented ancient wisdom or something far stranger. Tragedy came swiftly. During an experiment, Grimoire lost his life, leaving Lucretia stricken with grief. Watching over her in that time was Grimoire's son, Vincent Valentine, a Turk assigned to guard the laboratory. The bond between them deepened, even as the work pressed forward. It was then that the project diverged into rival paths. Under Professor Hojo, Shinra's most ruthless scientist, arose Project S, an effort to merge Genova's cells directly into a developing human, creating a perfect hybrid. Meanwhile, Dr. Hollander pursued Project G, focused instead on infusing adults with diluted Genova cells, seeking to pass on her traits without complete transformation. Both men were brilliant, and both carried ambitions that soon turned to rivalry. Lucretia found herself drawn into Hojo's vision, pressured by circumstance, and haunted by prophetic visions she could not fully explain. She made a fateful decision. She would offer her unborn child as the subject of Project S. Against Vincent's desperate protests, she proceeded. In specialized chambers with advanced monitoring, the experiment unfolded. Genova's cells were introduced into the fetus as it developed. The result was a child unlike any other. Sephiroth, born with silver hair and vivid unnatural eyes, living proof of Shinra's attempt to craft a new legacy. The birth nearly claimed Lucretia's life. In the aftermath, consumed with guilt for what she had done, she withdrew from the world, eventually entombing herself in crystal, preserved by the very energies she had once studied. Vincent, wounded when he confronted Hojo, was used as an unwilling subject for further experiments. Altered beyond humanity, he was left in a coffin beneath Shinra Manor, burdened with failure and sorrow. While Project S produced its most infamous subject, Hollander's Project G bore other fruits. From his work came Genesis Rhapsodos and later Angeal Hewley, two men whose lives would become inseparable from Shinra's story. Genesis, raised in the village of Banora among white-leafed dumapple trees, was a man of artistry and passion, obsessed with the ancient epic poem Loveless. He saw within its verses prophecies of sacrifice, gifts, and destiny, often quoting its lines as though they contained the key to his existence. Angeal, his childhood friend, embodied a different philosophy. Born in modest surroundings, he cherished honour and pride as guiding principles. His family's heirloom, the Buster Sword, represented those ideals. Though Angeal rarely wielded it in combat, he carried it as a symbol, an emblem of the dreams and values he meant to pass to his students. To him, being soldier was not simply about strength, but about responsibility and legacy. Both men entered soldier and rose to first class, becoming legends alongside another rising figure, Sephiroth. Yet while Angeal sought to mentor and preserve ideals, Genesis grew restless, his obsession with destiny pushing him down darker paths. Their friendship and rivalry wove threads that would shape the lives of those who followed. Among those lives was Zack Fair, a young recruit full of energy and determination. Nicknamed the Puppy by Angeal for his boundless enthusiasm, Zack became the protégé who inherited not only training but philosophy. Angeal's lessons about dreams and honour became the foundation of Zack's spirit, guiding him even through hardship. His optimism stood as a contrast to the weight carried by those before him. Around them, the structure of Shinra's military grew more complex. Director Lazard do Syracuse, secretly the illegitimate son of President Shinra, sought to lead soldier with a balance of discipline and compassion, though his hidden resentments shaped his choices. In the shadows worked the Turks, Shinra's covert agents. Figures like Sisney revealed that even within this ruthless organization, humanity remained. Her quiet acts of empathy often aided Zack in ways that defied her orders. Others, like the veteran Turk Tseng, walked the careful line between loyalty to Shinra and personal conscience, their lives intertwined with the fate of Aerith and other innocents. Dr. Hollander himself, unable to let go of rivalry with Hojo, pushed his experiments further. Desperate to prove the superiority of Project G, his obsession grew until it consumed him, dragging others into conflicts that spiraled far beyond the laboratory. Through these intersecting lives, Genesis with his poetry, Angeal with his honour, Zack with his unyielding spirit, the Turks with their complex loyalties, and Sephiroth with his engineered destiny, the legacy of the Genova project spread. Each carried its shadow, each bore consequences not chosen by themselves, but by the ambition of those who believed they could shape humanity through science. For Shinra, these were triumphs, living proof of their control over life itself. For the world, they were seeds of tragedies yet to come. What had begun as a study of preserved remains had become something far larger, a rewriting of destiny, inscribed not in ancient stone, but in blood, memory, and the choices of those forced to bear the weight of others' ambition. Thus the stage was set for conflicts that would ripple outward into Nibelheim, into Midgar, into the fate of the entire planet. The Genova project had created legends, but legends are never without cost. The mountain town of Nibelheim lay quiet beneath late summer skies, its timbered houses and narrow streets giving no hint of the tragedy about to unfold. Residents went about their days unaware that their village would soon be scarred into memory as the setting for one of history's most devastating turns. Reports of irregularities at the nearby reactor on Mount Nibel had reached Shinra. In response, they dispatched their finest, Sephiroth, already a legend as first-class soldier, to lead the mission. Alongside him travelled his comrade Zack Fair, also a first class, and 2 infantrymen. Among those infantry was Cloud Strife, returning quietly to his hometown, too ashamed of his failure to make soldier to reveal his identity. Their guide for the treacherous climb was a young woman from Nibelheim, Tifa Lockhart. The night before their ascent, villagers recalled glimpsing Sephiroth alone near the water tower, gazing upward at the stars, his face unreadable. Some would later wonder if, even then, he sensed something calling to him from the reactor above. The next morning the group began the climb. The path wound across jagged ridges, over swaying rope bridges, past fissures where raw mako seeped from the earth in unnatural pools. Tifa, familiar with every crag and slope, spoke of old legends, strange lights in the night, disappearances whispered through generations, tales of a sacred power tied to the mountain. Unknown to most, these stories carried truth. The Cetra had once revered this place as a convergence of the planet's energy. Inside the reactor, Sephiroth made discoveries that shook him to his core. He found chambers filled with twisted shapes, human subjects transformed by Shinra's experiments, their bodies warped through exposure to concentrated mako and Genova's cells. At the reactor's heart, behind a locked door marked with her name, lay Genova, what he believed to be his mother. In the days that followed, Sephiroth secluded himself in the library beneath Shinra Manor. There, surrounded by decades of research, he devoured document after document, piecing together the story of the Genova project and his own origins. What he read did not soothe him, it distorted him. In those pages, through Hojo's clinical records and half-truths, he came to believe he was not human at all, but the rightful heir of the ancients, destined to reclaim the planet from those who had betrayed it. Witnesses described his transformation as unsettling. The calm, composed warrior was replaced by a figure distant and fevered, pacing the halls at night, muttering of birthright and vengeance. Zack tried to reach him, but Sephiroth's words turned increasingly abstract, speaking of sacrifice, of humanity's guilt, of his destiny as judge. Then came the fire. One night, Sephiroth walked into Nibelheim and set it ablaze. Wooden homes burned fiercely, flames consuming generations of quiet life in moments. Villagers fled, some cut down in their flight, others lost in the smoke. Through the chaos, Sephiroth moved with terrible calm, his destination not the town, but the reactor, where he believed Genova awaited him. The aftermath was swift. Shinra, ever protective of its image, rebuilt the town in secret. Every home was reconstructed to look exactly as before. New inhabitants, Shinra employees with false memories, were placed within. To the world, Nibelheim appeared untouched. But the survivors, Cloud, Tifa, and a few others, carried the truth in scars and silence. The perfect village was nothing but a hollow replica, a facade over loss. What happened within the reactor defined all that followed. There Tifa confronted Sephiroth and was struck down. Cloud fought with desperate strength, seizing the blade that had wounded her and hurling Sephiroth into the depths. Both survived, but the course of destiny was set. Nibelheim became more than a tragedy. It was a fracture in history, the moment when Shinra's greatest soldier turned into the planet's greatest threat. Afterward, Cloud and Zack were captured by Professor Hojo. For 4 long years, they were held in the depths of Shinra Manor, subjected to experiments with Mako and Genova cells. Cloud, overexposed, sank into near catatonia, his mind fractured beyond recognition. Zack, stronger, endured but never ceased to protect his friend. When at last they escaped, their journey was harrowing. Zack, carrying Cloud's weakened body, led them across hostile lands toward Midgar. Along the way, he spoke constantly to the barely conscious Cloud, about his dreams, about Aerith waiting in Midgar, about the future. Cloud, drifting in haze, absorbed those words so deeply that they became threads in his own identity. Near the outskirts of Midgar, Shinra's forces finally caught them. Zack, unwilling to surrender, fought alone against overwhelming numbers. He fell there, his blood soaking the earth. With his final strength, he entrusted the Buster Sword, the blade once carried by Angel, then by Zack himself, to Cloud. His last words, promising legacy, sank into Cloud's broken mind. "You'll live, for the both of us." In the rain that followed, Cloud stirred. Traumatized, poisoned by Mako, and shattered by loss, his psyche reassembled itself in fragments. He unconsciously took on parts of Zack's memories, blending them with his own until the boundaries blurred. Staggering into Midgar with the Buster Sword on his back, he appeared not as a failed infantryman, but as a soldier first class. It was not deception, it was survival, the mind's desperate attempt to shield itself from pain. And so Cloud's new life began in the slums of Midgar, where destiny would intertwine with those who resisted Shinra. His past lay buried in confusion, but his path forward was inexorably tied to what he carried, a sword heavy with legacy and memories not fully his own. Yet even as Cloud stumbled toward Midgar, another thread of the story was unfolding far away, in gentler surroundings. The last of the Cetra lived quietly in the Sector 5 slums, Aerith Gainsborough. Her tale began decades earlier. Her mother, Ifalna, was one of the last true ancients. She had lived with Professor Gast after he abandoned Shinra, their love bridging science and Cetra wisdom. Together they tried to preserve knowledge of the ancients, recording histories long forgotten. But Shinra did not forget them. Hojo's agents found them when Aerith was just an infant. Gast was killed protecting his family, and Ifalna, wounded, fled with her daughter. She reached only as far as the Sector 7 train station, where she collapsed into the care of Elmira Gainsborough, a grieving woman waiting for a husband who would never return from war. With her final breath, Ifalna entrusted her child to Elmira, asking only that she keep her safe. Thus Aerith was raised in the slums, surrounded not by luxury, but by kindness. Flowers bloomed in her presence, even through broken church floorboards, where no greenery should grow. Against Midgar's steel and smog, her garden stood as a fragile miracle, a reminder of the harmony her people once lived by. Shinra never lost interest in her. The Turks, especially Tseng, kept constant watch. Some among them came to respect her quiet strength, though their orders never changed. Aerith was valuable, a living link to the ancients, yet she continued to live gently, selling flowers in the streets, offering beauty where none should exist. Aerith's laughter, her resilience, and her ability to hear the planet's whispers made her unique, not only as the last Cetra, but as someone who bridged the lost harmony of the past with the broken world of the present. And so, by the time Cloud stumbled into Midgar carrying Zack's sword and Zack's legacy, Aerith was already waiting in the shadows of Shinra's empire. Two survivors of different tragedies destined to meet, each carrying threads of the past into a future the planet itself seemed to shape. Thus the stories of Nibelheim, of Zack's sacrifice, of Cloud's fractured memory, and of Aerith's quiet strength wove together. In them the echoes of the Cetra still lived, even as Shinra's towers rose higher, and beneath it all the planet whispered, hurt, patient, waiting,